If there is a Fire Lord in Avatar whose impact is underappreciated, it is probably that of Fire Lord Azulon, the grandfather of Zuko and the namesake of his sister Azulon. Azulon, son of Sozin, born very late in Sozin's life, is the person who is most responsible for constructing the edifice of Fire Nation culture as it is by the events of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Sozin, of course, is the originator of a lot of these ideas. Sozin is the imperialist. Sozin is the one who decided to start the war. Sozin, at least according to the Avatar comics, is responsible for a whole lot of other terrible things the Fire Nation did. From burning the records of the nation's past to apparently suppressing the LGBT community, apparently. But Azulon is the person who made the nation what it is. He is the great consolidator of Sozin's authority. He is the one who turned Sozin's power from simply the dictates of one person into the institutions of a nation. He does not seem to be a particularly brilliant person. He does not have a piercing intellect. He seems, from what we know of him, to be rather petty and resentful. But he is nonetheless the great consolidator, the great upholder of the traditions that Sozin started, for better and mostly for worse. In him, the faults of one man become degraded into the institutional rot that will pervade the Fire Nation until the time of Zuko, until the time of the show that we know and love. Now, there's nothing innately wrong with these kinds of consolidators. Max Weber, the great sociologist of Germany, talks very well about how institutions work, whether religious or political. There is a certain figure who starts certain ideas and traditions and practices and rises to power through a certain kind of charisma. A word that Weber did not invent, but a word that came into the English language because of him. Charisma for Weber is something a lot stronger than it is for us now. We use that word so commonly and so offhandedly, but for Weber, the word meant something that was genuinely a kind of magic power. Not in a literal mystical sense, but in a way that is experienced by the masses as a kind of magic, as a kind of capacity that someone possesses that places them beyond the bounds of ordinary individuals. Through their brilliance, through their eloquence, they have, apparently, ostensibly, this control over their environment, their circumstances, in a way that ordinary people do not. They are not bound to the base laws of the world, of simple material demand, of certain ordinary desires. These charismatic leaders are the people who chart a path for a specific organization and get people to follow them because of their own particular aura, because of their success, because of their eloquence, because they seem to rise above the ordinary state of humanity. But obviously, these kinds of leaders are not common. As Rousseau so thoughtfully said, you cannot train someone to be a brilliant leader necessarily, and the institution of hereditary monarchy is a great example of that. There are many sons of great kings who were far from great kings themselves. There does not seem to be a correlation between the capacities of the father and those of the son. The sons of great rulers, while not terrible, are not any better leaders than anyone else, any random person picked in that role. This is what Rousseau says. And for Weber, this means that you pass from the great individual, not great in a moral sense, but great in terms of exerting a profound degree of influence over others and over a culture, and thus starting a legacy that outlasts them. That legacy is then transformed into the institution by their successors, who are not necessarily as brilliant, but know how to consolidate the ideas of the founder into a coherent organization. So that's what Azulon does. It's also quite interesting that Azulon is the great caretaker and upholder of Sozin's legacy, and yet he only knew his father as a very old man. Part of this is just an inevitable result of how the creators of Avatar set up the show. If you have Sozin starting the war as an old man, and then only 2 generations later you have Ozai, then that means that most of the war was conducted by Azulon. Sozin has his son as a very old man. We can only guess as to why, but it is probably to produce an heir and continue his legacy more than out of any deep love or romantic affection. And so Azulon is charged with preserving the legacy of someone he really does not know that well, and certainly did not know in the sense that we know him, as Sozin as this quite electric, passionate person who was very good friends with the Avatar. Sozin, for all his faults, was a genuine modernizer. He did not simply bow to the traditions of the past. He guided the nation based on what he personally, in his logical calculations, however suspect those might be, thought was right. And for all his faults, he was a genuine idealist. There is the deep sense in Avatar that he did want to make the world better, even if we, obviously, in the 21st century, in the English-speaking world, do not agree with that kind of vision. Azulon does not have that level of ambition. He does not seem to be the kind of person who makes his own destiny. He simply follows the rules set out for him. To an extent, that is tragic, and I do feel sorry for him in a way that I feel sorry for everyone in this family. After Sozin, they're raised in this rather unhealthy environment that's focused on control, on domination, on conquest. Azulon's character is most evidently demonstrated in Zuko Alone, where he responds to Ozai's plot to usurp the throne and have his brother be disinherited by not simply saying, that's a terrible plan, and you're a cruel person for thinking that, but then going and turning around and wanting to seek revenge on Ozai and kill his son. That is the kind of deleterious familial dynamics that exist in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Even when someone is right, they are wrong, because they are motivated by this brutality, this desire to punish, this desire to dismiss anyone who defies them. And this ruthlessness ultimately leads to Azulon's own downfall, because Zuko's life being in danger makes his mom, who was otherwise resigned to her fate in the palace, take action and do whatever is needed to keep him alive. And that ends up meaning killing Fire Lord Azulon. So she does. And then she escapes. Ozai thus takes the throne. Azulon does not seem to be a person of particular intelligence or wit. He is controlling and domineering in a way that hardened the spirit of the family and hardened the spirit of the Fire Nation as well. And I do want to note that even though Azulon, like Ozai, was born into these rather harsh, cold, grasping, and bloodless series of circumstances, that does not mean that they are not responsible, to an extent, for their own actions. Fyodor Dostoevsky has a great essay called Environment, where he is talking about how people simply saying that, oh, this thief or whoever was just a product of their environment and I would have done the same in that situation, is a problem for the nation. It's not that Dostoevsky thinks that people aren't produced to some extent by their environment. They obviously are. And Dostoevsky's books are filled with these harrowing, grotesque depictions of people shaped by markedly unhealthy environments. And yet, that does not excuse them. Mechanistically saying that, oh, anyone raised in a bad environment is inevitably going to become like this, is a negation of the moral responsibility of the individual to rise above the circumstances that they're in and try to act justly and morally. That's Dostoevsky's point, and it's one that I think is relevant for this show. Azulon is Sozin's heir. He inherits Sozin's legacy, and he does a great job of solidifying that legacy, much to the chagrin of those who came after him, and the world as a whole. Would he have turned out differently had he lived in a different environment? Had he been raised by other people? Had Sozin been someone other than who he was? Probably. But at the same time, he made the choices that he did, and a lot of people suffered. The same is true of Ozai later. Ozai is a product of his environment, the same as anyone else. He was raised in this milieu that prioritizes ruthlessness, conquest, militarism, destruction. But it is his choice to internalize those ideals and ultimately seek to dominate the earth with them to an extent that even exceeds the pursuits of his father and grandfather. Uncle Iroh raised in the same environment, did not turn out like that. That's not to say he wasn't molded by that environment. I think everyone who likes Iroh is a little chilled in Zuko Alone when he nonchalantly talks about burning Ba Sing Se to the ground. But at the same time, even then, Iroh's reputation was that of a more or less kindly person, it seems, who was a bit weird and really enjoyed his tea, as evidenced by what Azula says in Zuko Alone. So everyone is shaped by their environment, Avatar states. And an extreme environment like the Fire Nation, Royal Palace, shapes people in bad ways, but ultimately it's people's responsibility to act in a way they think is just. Just as Iroh and Ozai are different, so are Zuko and Azula. Both bear the marks of this desperate pursuit of their father's affections and the ruthlessly imperialist ideology of the Fire Nation, but they react to that in different ways. Azulon, the man who did more than anything to wage the 100 Years' War and conquer lands in the name of the Fire Nation, and who solidified the ideals of Sozin, his father, into the ideals of the Fire Nation, is a victim in a lot of ways. He's a tragic person who was born to fill a specific role as the heir in a specific, deeply unhealthy and destructive environment. And yet at the same time, he is responsible for his actions. He is responsible for the suffering and the pain he caused. Both things are true, and both should be considered. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, or do you want to see more videos like this one before anyone else. Keep watching Avatar. It's a great show. Always worth watching. Take care, everyone. Adios, comrades.